Good evening and welcome to the spring webinar series, Resources for Cannabis Businesses. My name is Dale Sky Jones, and I am the Executive Chancellor of Oaksterdam University, the first and longest running cannabis college in the world. I'm excited to be your moderator this evening for tonight's topic, Business of Cannabis Retail. We are here tonight because the Department of Cannabis Regulation has officially launched the Business Licensing and Compliance Assistance, or BLC, program to assist social equity applicants in the city of Los Angeles with obtaining a commercial cannabis license and operating a successful cannabis business. This series is part of a broader BLC program effort, which also includes other live webinars with different subjects and experts, checklists, worksheets, and other management tools that you can download and use, as well as self-directed online education on important topics related to running a successful cannabis business through the BLC's new learning management system, which is usually referred to as the LMS. Please visit cannabis.lacity.org for more announcements on our ever-expanding BLC program, including a career fair March 18th and 19th. So make sure you check the chat for links to RSVP for that career fair, March 18th and 19th. Put it on your calendar. As part of the city's social equity program, DCR has launched the BLC LMS portal, where you now have access to these recorded webinars in addition to online courses and digital resources made especially for you. Information on how to access this LMS will also be in the chat. Please note that there is a much longer educational series on tonight's topic already live in this LMS. So please check out the series, Management, Recruitment, and Training, and this on the business of cannabis retail, if you have not already done so. There's many subjects in there. And before we get started with tonight's topic, we do have a few housekeeping rules. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and can be viewed after the editing process via several channels. You, as an audience, will be muted with cameras off for the duration of the webinar. This means that your camera and audio functions will not be available to you during this session. However, you will be able to hear and see all of the panelists. Also, importantly, there is an open chat box where you can interact with one another for networking or commenting on the information. And please ask questions about this subject matter in the Q&A box. We are gathering these questions and we'll be responding to as many of your questions as possible during the Q&A session in the last 20 minutes of this webinar. You really are encouraged to utilize this Q&A box. It's right at the bottom. If you just look at the bottom of your Zoom screen, you will see that little panel. Chat is available for interaction with other participants as well, and everyone will be able to see what you have to say. So make sure that you take a moment to put into that calendar of yours, March 18th for job seekers. March 19th is the live job fair at Los Angeles Technical Trade College, and make sure you RSVP to get more information on the Grow 2022 career fair. Also, friendly reminder, if you are using that chat, please use caution when you are sharing personal information. This is a public forum. We want to make sure that we keep your questions focused on the subject matter at hand because it will move very fast, but we don't want you to put yourself at risk. So without further ado, it is my esteemed pleasure to introduce you to tonight's subject matter expert, Maha Haq. Maha has dedicated her entire adult life and career to the legal cannabis industry. Starting in 2012, she first worked at medical dispensaries in Los Angeles, California. She later worked at a cannabis delivery service, vertically integrated grows and manufacturing, and a business consulting firm, as well as an analytical testing lab. Since 2020, Maha has worked as an operations consultant for cannabis dispensaries, consumption lounges, and events through her firm, Hospitality. She is now the director of retail strategy at Green Thumb Industries, overseeing 84 dispensaries in 14 states, and they are participating in the career fair. Maha is a UCLA graduate and holds an MS in pharmacological sciences, concentrating on medical cannabis sciences and therapeutics from the University of Maryland School of Pharmacy. She's also the founder of Canna Club, a collegiate organization focused on cannabis education advocacy, and career opportunities with 26 chapters at different universities. Maha previously served as a researcher at the UCLA Cannabis Research Initiative and currently sits on the faculty of Oaksterdam, as well as the board of the Los Angeles chapters of the Cannabis Chamber of Commerce and NORML, the National Association to Reform Marijuana Law. Hello, Maha. Please share your screen. Take it away. I am excited to watch. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Dale. Well, welcome everybody. We're here to discuss the business of cannabis retail. Thank you so much for joining here tonight. We'll get through this session and then we'll have a Q&A at the end. So let's get on with it. Thank you for joining. All right, so in tonight's webinar, we are going to introduce you to some of the basics of the business of cannabis retail. We will define what retail is in a broad sense and what the term means in the context of the cannabis industry. We will also examine the role and position of retail in the cannabis supply chain and identify the main business models and competencies required for success in this sector. We'll talk about the revenue and cost structure of the retail business, identify the most prevalent business risks, and explore some of the best practices in use among leading cannabis retailers. We will wrap up our exploration of the business of cannabis retail with a through examination of the entire scope of the opportunity in the cannabis sector. All right. So let's start out with a sort of broad overview of what the business of cannabis retail is. Retail is a type of business that most people are really familiar with from a consumer perspective because they shop in retail stores often. So we all probably have an idea of what retail is, but let's think about how we can define the term. Retail refers to the sale of relatively small quantities of products to the final consumer for their own personal use. Retail businesses acquire the products they sell from wholesalers or distributors, who in many cases acquired the products directly from the producer or perhaps from another distributor or wholesaler. In any case, retailers almost always sell the products they get from their distributors at a higher price than the price they paid for them. This is known as a markup, which is the main source of profits in a retail business. A retail business does not necessarily need to have a physical storefront, though that it is a very common business model. A retail business can also make some or all of their sales online, though they typically do need a physical location to operate from and store the merchandise they sell. So as we can see on the slide, there's two main types of retail, a physical and a virtual store. So now we'll see it on this slide. There are two main types of retail. There's a storefront and a non-storefront. So in the state of California, a licensed cannabis retailer is the only type of business entity which is allowed to sell cannabis or cannabis products to the end consumer, which is the term we use to describe the individual person who is actually going to consume the product. Another term that is often used is the ultimate consumer, or simply just the final consumer or a final customer. Whatever you call it, they're the ones that are buying small quantities of product for their own personal use. This can happen in a store with a physical location, which is often called a brick and mortar dispensary, or there are also delivery-only businesses which do not have an actual storefront that customers can visit. Instead, they deliver the product from their facility to the home of the final consumer. So retail plays a pretty key role in the cannabis supply chain. Before we take a closer look at that role, let's do a quick review of what supply chain is. A supply chain is the entire ecosystem of organizations, people, intellectual property, and processes involved in the sequence of actions required to deliver a product or service to market. This includes everything from the suppliers of the raw materials needed to produce a product, all the way to the business that makes the final sale to the customer. The cannabis supply chain is a whole network of firms from a range of disciplines, from genetics to cultivation to manufacturing to retail, as well as the firms that provide them with the non-cannabis products, software, and professional services needed to operate. Every business which handles cannabis plant material directly must have a cannabis business license. In California, the supply chain is broken down by the type of licenses that are available and the activities which are allowed under each license type. There are cultivation licenses. These are the businesses growing the cannabis flower that is sold in dispensaries, and the plant material that gets sold to manufacturers to turn into concentrates and infused products. Manufacturing license is for those who create cannabis products like concentrates and edibles. Those two license types are the primary producers of all of the cannabis products that are sold in licensed dispensaries. Then there is a distribution license for those who move the products from cultivators and or manufacturers to the dispensaries and delivery services who will sell them to customers. Then you have the license type we are here to discuss today, the retail license. These are the businesses which actually sell the products to the final consumer. There are a lot of other entities in the cannabis supply chain as well, such as testing labs and suppliers of non-cannabis production inputs like fertilizers and solvents for making cannabis extracts. There are also a number of different kinds of each type of license, and each allow for different types of activities. For instance, within the cultivation license type, you have different licenses for indoor versus outdoor operations, specific licenses for nurseries that provide clones and seeds to other growers, and licenses which only allow the holder to participate in the harvesting and trimming of cannabis biomass. Right. So the role of the retail license in the supply chain is to acquire products, prepackaged flower, pre-rolls, and manufacture products like edibles and vape cartridges from distributors. Then they sell those products to the end consumer. Retail stores are the key link between the rest of the cannabis supply chain to the final consumers of cannabis products, who can also be considered a part of the supply chain. In many cases, the retail store is the only direct contact the consumer ever has with the cannabis supply chain. This position makes retailers sort of ambassador for the cannabis industry. In some cases, a single bad experience with a retail store can have a negative impact on the customer's perception of the entire industry. Retailers are also highly influential with customers. There are many consumers who place a lot of trust in the recommendations of their favorite bud tenders. Bud tenders are another term for the specialized salesmen at cannabis dispensaries. If you are a grower or a manufacturer, you really want bud tenders to be promoting your product. Cultivation is widely considered the foundation of the cannabis supply chain. If there were no growers, there would be no plant material, which is often referred to in wholesale cannabis markets as biomass. And if there was no biomass, there would be no cannabis or cannabis-infused products available to sell. But at the same time, retailers also have a massive impact on everything else in the supply chain, because this is the only point at which products are actually being sold to consumers. In business lingo, we call this B2C, or business to consumer sales. Up until this point in the supply chain, all of the other sales are what we call B2B, or business to business sales, which means that licensed businesses have just been transferring product and money around amongst themselves until a retail sale is made, and that money comes in from the end consumer. Cannabis flower and products are not, in fact, worth anything at all if they can't be sold. So that means that the volume of product that retailers are able to sell will have a significant impact on the profitability of all of the other licensed businesses in the cannabis supply chain. The amount of biomass that cultivators can sell and the number of products that manufacturers can sell is heavily influenced by the retail sector. All right. Now that we better understand what cannabis retail is, let's take a look at some of the different business models you can find in the cannabis retail sector. So before we do that, let's make sure we are all on the same page about exactly what a business model is. To put it in the most simple terms possible, a business model describes how a business will make a profit. So in a traditional brick and mortar retail business model, for example, you make money by selling products to customers in a physical storefront. The retail acquires merchandise from distributors and wholesalers and then sells them to their customers at a higher price. The money that is left over after the store pays for the merchandise and their other expenses like rent, utilities, and payroll is the profit they actually earn. A solid business model should identify the products or services which will be sold, the target market for those products, and the costs to produce them. Let's apply all of these to discuss the basic business models for retail business. First, you have the traditional storefront retail business model, which we used as an example just a second ago. In this model, the business sells products they have acquired from licensed distributors at a wholesale cost. The retailer marks up the product and sells it to customers. With a physical storefront, the target market is typically cannabis consumers who live near the store, though they may be able to draw in customers from a wider geographic range if they offer some sort of unique in-store experience, which makes them more of a destination for people who aren't local. In California and the city of Los Angeles, any business which has a storefront retail license may also make delivery sales. In this model, you are making sales both inside your store and taking the product directly to customers' homes and completing the sales transaction there. You may be able to expand the size of your target market with deliveries, but the act of delivery also comes with pretty significant risks. Anytime you take a product out of your store, there is a chance something might happen to it, and the potential for product loss and compliance violations increases significantly. Nevertheless, another common business model in cannabis retail is delivery only. In this model, the retailer has a physical location that they operate from, but they do not make sales to customers inside of that location. There is no physical storefront. Instead, customers place orders online or over the phone, and the retailer brings the order directly to the customer's home and completes the sales transaction there. Once again, there is some potential to capture a wider target audience or target market with a delivery business than a storefront alone, but there are also some pretty significant risks. Staying in compliance with track and trace requirements gets a lot more difficult once you take the products outside the controlled setting of your facility and out into the world, where there are a lot more bad things that can happen to them and a lot more opportunities to make a mistake with track and trace compliance. So these first three business models are the most common ones in the market right now. But there are a couple of other minor variations on those models that we want to mention quickly before we move on. The first one is storefront retail with a consumption lounge. Currently, regulators are still figuring out the specifics of how this is going to work in Los Angeles. So actually launching a business with this model right now is not very likely. However, a number of formal and informal surveys of consumer attitudes suggest that consumption space is something they would very much like to see more of. So that is something to keep in mind as you are planning out the long-term growth trajectory of your business. There are also an increasing number of retail businesses who have their own in-house brands of cannabis flower or manufactured products. The owners of some of these retail operations have pursued separate licenses for cultivation and or manufacturing businesses, and are producing at least some of the flower and infused products they sell in their retail stores. This approach gives them far greater control over the quality of the products they source, and also creates an opportunity to capture more of the profits from both production and sales. The microbusiness model allows license holders to conduct all of these activities at a small scale within the same facility. So they can have a very limited cultivation area if they choose, their own extraction and manufacturing capacity, and they may also sell their finished products to end consumers at their site as well. So in the cannabis retail space, there tends to be a lot more similarities than differences among these different business models. For all retail businesses, the LA market is, in a few words, very, very competitive. Consumers have a lot of options. Most probably have at least one storefront location, retail location within a relatively short drive or walk of their home, from their home or workplace, and potentially multiple delivery options as well. At the same time, there is still strong sales competition from the illicit market, which is unsanctioned cannabis that is sold outside of the regulated medical and adult use cannabis system. As with almost all types of retail businesses, almost all of the cannabis retail models face a pretty high degree of employee turnover, meaning that their employees don't always stay in their jobs for very long. For the most part, this happens because retail jobs tend to be on the lower end of the wage spectrum, and there are often few opportunities for career advancement. This tends to be particularly true in the customer-facing bud tender role. This is really unfortunate because the effectiveness of your bud tenders is a major driver of your revenue. If you don't have people behind the counter who are good with customers and know how to make good product recommendations, your sales will almost certainly suffer. At the same time, well-qualified bud tenders can be hard to find and even harder to keep. However, probably the biggest challenge an operator will face in a cannabis retail business model is compliance. Every licensed cannabis business in the state of California, whether they're growers, manufacturers, or retailers, have to record and report the movement of all cannabis and cannabis products to regulators through the state's mandatory track and trace software metric. Retailers have a lot of movements to report because they have to report every retail sale they make. They also are receiving a lot of different types of products from distributors on a regular basis, and they have to keep close track of all of those transfers and report them to regulators as well. Retailers are also responsible for collecting applicable state and local taxes from customers. A number of dispensaries recently have faced some pretty heavy scrutiny from tax auditors who aren't really all that interested in whether you made an honest mistake or were actually attempting to evade paying your taxes. There are a lot of opportunities to misstep your requirements, and only one way to get it exactly right. No one is perfect, and regulators understand that licensees are going to make mistakes. However, if you exhibit a pattern of non-compliance with track and trace requirements, you will most certainly find yourself subject to an audit and possibly enforcement action. You could eventually lose your license and everything you invested into getting it. Let's wrap up this introduction to the business of cannabis retail by taking a look at the skills and experience you want to have on your leadership team when you're trying to launch a dispensary. First off, some sort of experience in retail or hospitality management is critical. If you don't have someone in your organization who has run a retail store, a restaurant, a hotel, or some other business where customer service is central to the business model, it is going to be very difficult for you to identify and overcome the challenges you are bound to face. Likewise, if no one on your team has experience with Metric, the state's mandatory track and trace reporting system, or at least has experience working with high volume point of sale or POS software, it's going to be hard for you to select and implement a compliant inventory tracking system. Some advanced experience with inventory management is also helpful. Someone who has experience overseeing inventory, receiving, reconciliation is going to help you stay compliant. And someone who knows how to analyze key performance indicators to make data-driven inventory decisions is going to help you be more profitable. It's not impossible to launch a retail store without a lot of cannabis product knowledge, but you are most likely going to make a few more mistakes along the way if you aren't experienced with verifying the quality of cannabis flower and cannabis products and have some sense of what the trends are in customer preferences. The same goes for marketing and advertising. You may be able to get by without a ton of experience in these areas, but you can benefit a lot from at least seeking some advice from a marketing agency or consultant with specific experience in the cannabis sector if your team is lacking these particular skills. Security is another competency which is really great to have on your team, but which can be supplemented with carefully vetted third-party vendors and consultants. In particular, you should look for someone who has experience working in the cannabis sector because they are more likely to be familiar with the specific regulatory requirements for licensed businesses and more familiar with the specific concerns that tend to arise when you have a lot of cash on hand. So yeah, make note of these 6 points, 6 priorities for your team. All right, so every piece of property in Los Angeles has been placed into one of several broad categories or zones which define the allowed uses of that property. The most common zones are residential, commercial, and industrial. Each of these categories can be subdivided further into more specific types of use. For example, in LA, there are different designations for light versus heavy industrial uses. This practice is called zoning. The city and county of Los Angeles has the authority to designate which properties fall within each zone and create laws and rules for what types of activities are and are not allowed in these zones. This set of laws is often called a zoning code. Most cities, including LA, have some sort of zoning code. The Los Angeles Municipal Code states that cannabis retail activities are only allowed in certain zones and that all cannabis activity is prohibited in unincorporated areas of Los Angeles County. In Chapter 10, Article 5, Section 2, titled Location and Other Requirements for Commercial Cannabis Activity, you can find more information about land use activity. You'll have to check the zoning of each site you are considering to see whether or not there is an area where it has been specified that commercial cannabis activities are allowed. So these are considerations for allowed locations. All right, facility requirements. So now that we have a better understanding of what you are allowed, of where you are allowed to locate a retail business, let's take a closer look at the building itself and what type of facility you will need to set up a compliant and successful operation. There are quite a few security standards that a commercial cannabis facility needs to meet, according to state and local cannabis rules. There are also business considerations that you need to keep in mind. A compliant space isn't going to help you much if there isn't a good flow for customers to move through the store or adequate room for employees to do their work. But you do need to make sure you can meet your compliance requirements first and foremost. So let's take a closer look at what your compliance due diligence is when securing a facility for retail cannabis. A commercial cannabis facility can't have residential locks on the doors and windows, for example. They must have commercial grade doors and locks. You'll need to be able to adequately secure any limited access areas, which includes any place you might be storing cannabis off the sales floor and the area where your surveillance video storage equipment is housed. You'll need to make sure that you'll be able to install cameras in a way where all of the places that need to be covered by surveillance are covered. This includes everything within 20 feet of all points of entry and exit points. In addition to entry and exit points, which must be recorded from both indoor and outdoor vantage points, your video surveillance system must cover certain parts of your facility's interior. Cameras must record areas where cannabis goods are weighed, packed, stored, loaded, and unloaded for transportation, as well as where cannabis goods are prepared or moved within the licensed premises. Essentially, any area where cannabis is present or will be present must be viewed and captured on your video surveillance system. You must also have coverage in all limited access areas and security rooms. In areas where a surveillance system storage device is stored, there must be at least one camera recording the access points to the secured surveillance recording area. According to local code, cannabis goods must be stored in a building designed to permit control of temperature and humidity and prevents the entry of environmental contaminants such as smoke and dust. The area in which cannabis goods are stored shall not be exposed to direct sunlight. At the same time, all windows that face the street have to be at least 50% transparent windows and provide a clear and unobstructed view free of reflective coatings. Employee break rooms, changing facilities, and bathrooms must be completely separated from the storage areas. Cannabis can never be stored outdoors. A licensed retailer must also maintain a fireproof safe on site. Because there are a limited number of places in town where retail cannabis is allowed, you may not be able to find a space which meets all of these requirements. You may find that you'll need to transform a space that is less than ideal. All right, let's do our wrap up. So now that we have explored the startup costs of a retail business, let's take a moment to think about how much this might cost to start up. Generally speaking, you will hear this all of the time in the cannabis space. It depends. For a retail business, startup costs can range from $1 million to $3 million, according to ArcView Group, a leading cannabis investment firm in California. A lot depends on where you want to locate, how large of a space you want to have, and whether or not you want to add additional amenities like a consumption lounge or community space. Generally, ramping up and staying afloat until you can secure your license and sell products to customers will be expensive. You'll most likely need to pay the lease at your facility while you are working to secure your license, even though your doors won't be open and you won't be able to sell products. You might need to pay to retain key team members, especially those in leadership and upper management roles, before you are fully in operation. You'll almost certainly want to start developing your brand and doing some marketing so that customers know who you are before they open. And depending on your marketing strategy, you'll probably incur some costs from this. Having at least $1 million in the reserves is likely a necessity to open a retail facility. So major operating cost categories. So let's take a look at that. So this is major ongoing costs of operating a dispensary. You will have to pay your lease, and most commercial leases require the tenant to cover their own costs for electricity and water utilities. Then you will have to pay your employees. There are a lot of other additional costs associated with employing people above what you have to pay them in wages or salary. These include payroll taxes, workers' compensation contributions, employee benefits, and much more. Managing all of these compliance requirements also comes with administrative costs. These tasks are time consuming and also can lead to costly mistakes if not done properly. So if you're paying for the store and the people working and the people working there, now you need some products to sell, which is also going to cost money. The invoicing terms that distributors are going to offer you can vary. As a new operator, you may be asked to pay the full cost of the products when the distributor drops them off at your store. With time, you may develop relationships with with vendors who will allow you to pay later within 10 or 15 days. But at some point, you'll need to pay your distributor for the inventory you order, regardless of whether or not the products are selling in your store. Keeping up with track and trace requirements for cannabis products and retail sales can be time-consuming and costly. Compliance with your metric reporting requirements as a retailer is not an easy task for any cannabis business. Some retailers have thousands of individual sales which need to be recorded in the state track and trace system on a quarterly basis. And they could be dealing with hundreds of different products coming in and going out. There are very, very few compliant dispensaries that are still operating today that perform sales without some sort of point of sale and inventory management software that integrates with Metric to automate as many parts of their track and trace reporting as possible. This type of software can also typically provide insights into your sales that are very useful for a business owner. There are a lot of software options out there and a really big range of prices, which varies a lot depending on what kind of features are available, but virtually all of them require you to pay an ongoing monthly fee. There are a lot of low fee options out there, but you want to make sure you understand what you are getting and what you aren't at the various price points for dispensary inventory software. Your software is critical to your compliance, so having some additional features or support might be worth the extra expense. If you are offering delivery, this will come with a lot of additional compliance concerns that require a separate software solution or will need to be added to your existing POS system for an additional cost. So we're getting an idea of the cost associated with operating a dispensary, the cost of the facility itself, the people working there, the products for sale, and the software you need for inventory management and compliance. Beyond that, there are the costs of marketing your business. Even if you are planning to rely a lot on social media marketing, which many dispensaries do, those efforts will take time and effort, which costs money. If you are planning on doing paid advertising, there will be expenses associated with creating the content of the advertising and distributing it in a compliant manner, of course. There is a lot of competition in the retail dispensary space, so you'll want to really think about how much of your operating budget you should devote to marketing. Marketing is essential to bringing customers in the door, but marketing can also get very expensive very quickly, such as if you are buying a lot of ad space. It's worth the money if it brings in a significant amount of revenue, but you'll need to keep track of your marketing costs and gather some data on how effective your efforts are in order to figure out whether or not that happened. So best practices. So let's take a look at some of the practices leading companies in the cannabis retail sector are doing to be successful. These things are often called best practices, which can be defined as commercial or professional procedures that are accepted or prescribed as being correct or most effective. Okay,
And Maha, we just have about a minute to wrap up on best practices to go to Q&A. Thanks.
Oh, okay. All right. So the most successful dispensaries are those that have placed compliance among their top priorities. A retail business that can't stay in compliance with cannabis business regulations like track and trace and security requirements is not likely to stay in business very long. Even small mistakes can attract the attention of regulators who will audit your business activities if they suspect that there are violations. In many cases, you'll have a chance to correct minor compliance issues without too big of a penalty. But if you show a pattern of repeat violations, the consequences become more severe. You could ultimately lose your license even for small mistakes, even if you didn't intend on doing anything wrong. Companies who are successful in achieving compliance typically have leadership and management who emphasize the importance of compliance and lead by example. They also tend to have well-established standard operating procedures, or SOPs, which detail exactly how certain tasks associated with compliance are supposed to be performed. For instance, if a dispensary should have an SOP for ringing up a customer's purchase. The SOP should explain exactly how to do that in the dispensary's point of sale system to complete the transaction in order to ensure that the POS reports the transaction to Metric. And you almost certainly need to have a POS system which is integrated with Metric, so sales can be reported automatically. It is really, really difficult to run a dispensary without this kind of software, though technically you can enter all of the data you need to report into Metric manually. Not advice though, but that's hard. And you want compliance to be easy. That is really the best way to stay in compliance. Make it easy for your employees to be compliant. Make sure they are fully trained on the necessary SOPs and make sure you have a POS system that is user-friendly and provides warnings if the bud tender might be about to make a mistake. Set up the physical design of the area behind registers to minimize the potential for products to be misplaced while a transaction is underway. Okay, so creating a unique customer experience. We know that competition is a major barrier to success in cannabis retail. Because of that, a lot of the leading dispensaries have worked really hard to create a unique and memorable experience in their store in order to stand out from the crowd. And standing out can be more difficult than you might expect because there are still a lot of limitations on what you are allowed to do inside a retail cannabis store. For instance, you can't have live music or a DJ. That's a violation of state and local law. In fact, you can't have entertainment of any kind inside a licensed dispensary. You can't even have a pinball machine in a dispensary. Even creating a unique interior design can be tricky because you have to keep compliance in mind. You need to meet certain standards for camera coverage that will limit the ways in which you can manipulate the lighting or add decorative elements that could obstruct lines of sight. And interior design can get very expensive very fast, especially if you are trying to create a unique look. However, what's in the store or how it looks isn't necessarily going to be the main determining factor in whether or not a customer has a good experience in a store. More often than not, none of that is going to matter to the customer if they don't get great customer service. A bad or even just a mediocre experience with a bud tender can turn a customer away for life. In order to deliver amazing service on every transaction, you're going to have to uphold customer care as a main value in your store and be sure that customers are empowered to do what they need to do to ensure that the customer has a good experience. For instance, you want to make sure that your bud tenders aren't under any pressure to finish up a customer during customer consultations quickly in order to meet a productivity standard. They should know that they have all of the time they need with every customer to ensure that they are matching them with the right products. With all that said, the visual appearance of your store does still matter. How your store looks is going to have a huge impact on customers' first impressions and will influence their perception of their experience. At the same time, you don't have to spend a lot of money on a fancy interior design to make sure that your store is clean, your displays are tidy, and your bud tenders are dressed appropriately. You can also enhance the appearance of your store without spending a lot of money. displays from local artists, or hire an art student to paint a mural, which highlights the unique aspects of your business and your neighborhood. Overall, the goal of creating a unique customer experience is to give customers a specific reason to go out of their way to visit your store. Customers have a lot of options out there, and the leading stores know what they need to entice customers to come in. Oop. Dale, you want me to stop or are we good?
Yeah, we do need to wrap to get to
Ooh.
Q&A, and this is the teaser for folks to go to the LMS because this is the opportunity to see the rest. These webinars are always too short, especially when the presenter is as talented as you. There's so much to talk about, and I
Yeah,
know that you
so much to
do.
go over.
I know. Do you want to briefly just mention, we might say when you go to the LMS, you're also going to learn about the scope of your opportunity as well as barriers to entry. We'll go over competition, and Maha also discusses serving the underserved needs of the community. We want to make sure that you understand both your potential for growth and market outlook, as well as how to be a part of your community. So it's definitely more to see in the LMS, and I strongly encourage you, as Maha is the presenter in that. So are you ready to get to some questions?
Let's do it.
All right,
I'm
I'm
excited.
excited. Our friend from Floating Fox Company wants to know, as a new brand, should we focus our initial sales outreach and strategy to pitching retailers, or should we pitch distributors first to carry our product?
Ooh, oh man, it honestly can go either way, but making retail relationships before making a move with a distributor is always great. It's easier to get into a shop than it is to get into a distribution facility. So letting the shops know who you are, I think would be a great first step, and then taking it from there by talking to distributors, and then formalizing your relationships with retailers.
Great question, Floating Fox Company. Bobby would like to know, especially you have multiple talents, Maha. Can you speak to California cannabis event licenses briefly? Any information on how to apply or requirements that you're aware of?
So an event organizer license is just like any other cannabis license type, but the application process is a bit different. Ultimately, what you need as an event organizer licensee is a retail partner. So you need to have a retail licensee to work with you on that event, because cannabis transactions and sales will go through that retail partner. So before even applying for the event organizer license type, I highly recommend identifying a retail and or delivery partner to pair up with you in that venture.
So find a partner, but also know your partner. It's
Yeah.
good to know. Yes, know that they've done it, not just a dream
You
to
need to
do
make
it.
sure your local city approves of the location that the event will be taking place at as well. So need to make sure that you're as transparent as possible about your event plans. Let the city know where you are proposing to host it, and also make sure the city gives you a couple other recommendations or suggestions of locations that they have pre-approved.
Wonderful suggestions, and realize that there are sometimes multiple permits that you need for the different
Yeah.
things that you're doing at your
Not just the
event.
cannabis event organizer's license. You needed like an events insurance and all sorts of good stuff. So going to be a lot of people there, and you're going to be held responsible for all of them.
I hear a future course request for DCR for the next round for the LMS here, so we'll invite you back for that, Maha. Thank you. Great question, Bobby. What is the average square footage of a dispensary, Maha?
So, so this is according to MJ Biz Daily, a news source for cannabis news. So in 2020, the average medical dispensary was around 3,300 square feet, and the average adult use dispensary was a little over 4,000 square feet. So this is a consideration when you are looking for a property. Make sure you have ample of space to have a solid showroom, an area for your queue or your line. And of course, the back area where you have either an office, and then you also have your storage and your vault. So those are the average numbers. So 3,000 to 4,000, a little over 4,000 square feet.
And I might circle back with a follow-up question on that. But first, Elizabeth would like to know if there are support services for retailers for fire code requirements. For example, how to get everything in shape prior to inspection, if you had any advice on that.
Ooh, so obviously having a good relationship with the city you're applying in is necessary. Fire codes, all and land use permits, all of that goes through the city. So identifying those key individuals who are owners of, or rather leaders for those particular inspection requirements, and acquaintancing yourself with them is highly recommended before and during your license application process. So you can totally ask the city and ask who is in charge of fire code inspections, who is in charge of capacity requirements. So the city should be able to direct you to the right individual, and that's how you can start building your rapport before or during your license application.
Indeed. And we have found that if you contact your local fire department, that they will help do walkthroughs and educate you on what you need prior to your inspection, because they genuinely want you to be safe and keep your community safe. So they're here for education and outreach. What differences do you see, Maha, between larger and smaller dispensaries with respect to, customer service or the type of resources that might be available to customers?
So larger dispensaries, you often see a kiosk or self-service or pickup order options for customers to help with handling long lines if it's a very popular large shop. So you have different options in ordering. You don't have to even talk to a bud tender. You can just serve yourself at a kiosk. But smaller dispensaries, I've personally observed, have more of the old school traditional counter service style, and have a bud tender that essentially walks through the entire experience with the customer. So same can happen at a large dispensary, but you have options besides just that one option that the small dispensary can handle.
Maha, what skills have helped you most as a retail operator?
So I know we talked a lot about compliance. So compliance, you have to love it. Read all the rules. That's how your skills are going to go up, is if you learn all the rules and understand them with your eyes closed. That is a big skill I think is necessary for any retailers. Be a compliance guru, but there are designated individuals for that. But as the operator, you also need to know what your compliance regs are. So that's number one. And number two, building a good team. You don't have all the skills that's needed to run a shop. Have a very, very rounded out team, a full team that can come up when they have a skill that you don't have.
And
you mentioned that earlier too.
Indeed.
Team.
And that brings me to the final question before I'm going to ask you any closing thoughts that you have. So the final question, kind of tailing on this last one, is, as a retailer, what are the benefits of selling your own branded products? And if you think it's better to get into cultivation, manufacturing, some type of micro license, or is it better to work with a partner who makes white label?
So both options are very viable. If you have the capital, then of course, go ahead and apply for a secondary license that can pair well with your retail license, whether that's cultivation, manufacturing. Everyone has their own preferences and skill sets. But if you have the capital, do it on your own. But if you don't, a partnership will be beneficial. You can do a white label agreement. That's always an option. And a lot of folks are doing that. A lot of the top performing brands create their brands through white label partners. So do not shy away from an opportunity like that. But of course, if you have the capital or you have an investor, doing it all in-house on your own, having the most control is obviously preferred.
Any closing thoughts you want to share with us
Oh,
before
of
we
course.
close?
So, as retailers, we have the opportunity to shape trends. As retailers, we have a lot more power than we really can think of. Brands, of course, are there, but they rely on us to sell their product. So keep that in mind. Retailers have the opportunity to shape trends.
I will let you close with that final thought. Thank you so much. And hopefully the audience will also help me thank Miss Maha Hawk in the chat. You have been amazing and have a beautiful night. And to the rest of you, I have some really important things to tell you. So hang on for just a few more minutes. First, the most important thing is thank you. Thank you so much for attending this webinar this evening. The full course for this topic is already available for you in the Learning Management System, the LMS, for you to get more detailed information on tonight's subject. Also, many templates are available for you to use to support your retail management efforts in the LMS. During the month of March and beyond, these webinars are happening every Tuesday and Thursday evening. This next Tuesday from 6 to 7, the topic will be preparation of business plans and operational development with Mr. David Abernathy, who is a principal at ArcView Management Consulting. He also serves as a board member for the Minority Cannabis Business Association and Oaksterdam University. Next week, we would love to also have you join the DCR for another webinar on patient and consumer safety with Miss Tiffany Watkins, who is the Director of Sales and Marketing at the People's Ecosystem. This information webinar will focus on foundational cannabis education that everyone who dispenses cannabis should know. I would also like to share a little bit more key information for you. First, before you leave, please fill out this brief survey. It's right in the chat box to share your experience tonight. We're dropping the link right now. We really appreciate your feedback. We use it to fine tune these webinars moving forward, and we want to know what else you need to know. Also, the DCR encourages licensed cannabis businesses to hire local, transitional, and equity workers. To support these efforts, DCR will be hosting an in-person career fair on March 19th, 2022 at Los Angeles Trade Technical College, LATTC. If your licensed business is hiring and you wish to attend to meet and interview job seekers, DCR is also providing small group and individual coaching sessions to employers and additional career connections. So if you're wishing to learn more about successful hiring and retention practices, how to fulfill the good faith hiring requirements that are part of the law for Los Angeles, make sure you save the date, March 19th, to RSVP for the live event. And if you're a job seeker, we have an online event on March 18th to get you ready to get that job. To get more information on the Live Grow 2022 job fair, the career fair, and if you are a social equity licensee, you can also sign up to receive small group and individual coaching on workforce development. It is the same link for the career fair. So please make sure that you fill out your RSVP for that career fair. Make sure you fill out that feedback form in chat. Each one only takes you a couple minutes and it will make such an impact. Please don't forget, you can find more information in depth on this subject and more in the LMS. I am Dale Sky Jones, and on behalf of the Department of Cannabis Regulation, I thank you for attending and I wish you a beautiful night.